All right, so Chris O'Reilly is a pastor at Knox Thedford since 1988, which is amazing. Both she and the congregation have grown much over those years and are committed to serving Christ, each other, and the community. Great mission statement. Chris is married to Jessie, a Texan. She has one daughter, two grandchildren, two Labrador retrievers as well. So a dog lover. Christine plays ice hockey on Sunday nights in a local women's league and is a season ticket holder to the Sarnia Sting. We won't hold that against her, but good to know she's a hockey fan. Plays guitar, percussion as well, multi-talented. And one thing people might not know is that she's a first-generation Canadian of Scotch-Irish descent. And some of her favorite shows include Call the Midwife and Downton Abbey. And I just have to say it on a personal note that Chris is just the real deal. So I've got to know her. She's just clearly passionate about her faith and ensuring that is expressed in real ways. Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Matthew. You're very kind, sir. So appreciate the
It's all true. It's all
always good to talk to you. So.
Okay, so Christine, you know what I'm going to ask you. So what is a biblical insight about the nature of community that will help us get back to things being better than they were before? Because I think community is one of those things where, now that with physical distancing and everything else, people can't physically be together the same way they could be before in groups and worship and everything else. So the nature of community. So what might be, a biblical insight about that that'll help us get back to things being better than they were before?
Okay. It's a great question. I think that we are doing a lot of rethinking of community, obviously in the church, but also just in society in general. What does it mean to be community? What does that look like? And what is that going to look like in the future? Because the old normal is gone and will not be coming back. So how do we go through into a new sense of community in the present, let alone in the future? So as far as a biblical insight, one of the passages that is a famous one is Romans 12. And leading up to this, of course, Paul's been writing for 11 chapters already, and really talking about the world, the state of the world, God's gift of Jesus Christ, and the presence of Christ, but also how the transformation that gift brings to individuals and community. I mean, he's writing to a community in this letter, not just to a single individual. So how do we be community? How do we live as community? How do we think community as followers of Jesus? And so chapter 12 begins with, and so you got to look at all the stuff that goes before that, about what that means to be in Christ and the incredible gift that God's given us. This is not something we manufacture. It is not something that we create for ourselves. It is a gift. And so he says, so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give yourself to God because of all he's done for you. He talks about worship, about thinking differently. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And I think this pandemic is really changing the way that we think about many things, and certainly when it comes to community. The rest of the chapter basically goes into how do we live together as God's body, as the body of Jesus Christ, and the different roles and functions that we have. But it's kind of getting down into like verse 9 and on that I think are good answers to the question that you've asked today. So don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. So hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good, love each other with genuine affection, and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. And then this verse, which is easy to remember because it's 12:12. Rejoice in our confident hope, be patient in trouble, and keep on praying. So I'll maybe say a little bit more about that later on. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them, and always be eager to practice hospitality. Bless the people who persecute you. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, and live in harmony with each other. And don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. So I think a lot of those are really key insights into how to be community. So one of the things that the pandemic, I think, has taught us that's important to think about community is how interdependent we are. We like to think of ourselves as independent, self-made, all of those phrases. But this has taught us how interdependent we are, and how interdependent we are upon a lot of people that we might not normally take the time to acknowledge.
Mhm.
So how interdependent we are when it comes to the groceries that we all need, right? So we're dependent on our farmers. Now, I live and serve in a rural community, and how the pandemic has affected our farm families now and in the future is yet to be seen. But I mean, certainly it has had a huge impact on us, both in those who work on the farms. We've had dairy farmers that have had to dump milk. We have workers that are supposed to come in from the Caribbean countries, Mexico and stuff, to help harvest crops because Canadians don't want to do that work, and how that is all different. So there's huge things around that. To the teenage kid that's stocking the grocery shelves, who is now suddenly a frontline worker. But now it has taught us, I think, we're interdependent on them in our community. So how do we treat those people? How do we value those people? Not just in what we pay them, but in how we treat them, so that we look beyond just hurry up and get the stock on the shelves to this is a real person with a face and a name, and who's serving here, to the cleaners at hospitals and long-term care facilities that are again part of the ugly side that has been revealed in this pandemic is how dependent we are on people of color and women, many of whom have lost their jobs and are facing deep financial stress. Listen to a woman who's from the Philippines who is a cleaner at a hospital and sends money, or to a cleaner at a hotel, sends money back every month to her family in the Philippines. She doesn't have a job now. So not only is that affecting her, and she lives in a major city, so the $2,000 she gets a month barely pays her rent. So hopefully this pandemic will give us a better sense of that interdependence, a deeper sense of humility, and a deeper sense of compassion and care. So how do we show hospitality? And taking a little bit of concern about our neighbors, like, do we even know who our neighbors are at the best of times, let alone at this time? How do we treat the people that are caring for our loved ones in a long-term care facility or at the hospital? So is there a way that we can build better relationships with those people as part of our interdependence upon one another in community?
So let's just say next week all this is over, and I know it's not going to be a situation where like big groups can gather instantly, but if that was the case, it was like, okay, everything's fine, guaranteed, big group, what would be the first thing you'd do?
There's a lot of people I want to hug. I'm longing for the day when we are able to gather together again as a church community, and I want to be hearing our people together, praying together and singing together.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So my next conversation is with Alex Douglas, and let me just give you a few words of introduction about Alex. He's the pastor at the Family Church of Heritage Green, where he's been pastor for 6 years. And I love their mission. Their mission is to be unapologetically family-focused as a church, which is great. He's been married for 13 years, has 4 children, and I'm told that up until this past Sunday, he had up to 9 inches of hair on his head, which is clearly gone now. Your hair buzzing cut skills are better than mine. I should also say 2 more things. He's a New York Rangers fan, big time. I'll try to forgive him for that. And if you sometimes see me on Sunday wearing a vest, it's a 100% fashion steal from Alex. You're up at the conference last year. I'm like, man, that looks sharp. I gotta do that. All right, so you know the question I'm going to ask you. What is a biblical insight about faith at home that will help us get back to things being better than they were before?
Well, in listening to your introduction, I was struck by the moment that we have right now is very similar to the moment that my church had 6 years ago. Sometimes when we're really praying for change, what we really yearn for is a stop so that we can start again and not have to always be instituting dozens and dozens of changes on the fly, and what do we keep and what do we let go. And when I look at what's happening in the world around us right now, I think what we've been handed is inadvertently a reset when we've been given a stop. And through that, we have the opportunity to respond with a whole new normal, a better normal, as you mentioned. And as I look through Scripture and the challenges that are there for us as a family, the mission that's put before us as families, I think we have the greatest opportunity right now to embrace those things that I think probably previously we might have tried to explain away or place as secondary in lieu of other things that we were adopting, which may be important. As families, I think typically we often look at our parents as the best example to copy, but also to improve upon. And I think, again, what this opportunity provides us is the chance to look at our own parenting, our own family life before, and then ask ourselves, are we actually doing the things that we've been called to do? And I think especially what comes to mind is, James 2, where he talks about faith without works being dead. And as hard as that is to consider, and as stark a picture as that paints, I think what it does is really put things out there for us to look at and say, are we enacting faith in our home, or is it dead? Were we relying too much perhaps on the things that were out there that we could do with others, and maybe not taking on as much ourselves? And because what we've been blessed with right now is this captive audience of family. I think, certainly in my case, the last 2 months, I have spoken to my children more than I probably have in the last 2 years. I probably raised my voice more in the last 2 months than I have in the last 2 years as well. But the captive audience piece, I think, is quite key, because my kids have seen me do way more in the last 2 months than they've seen me do previous to that, because I don't have most of the conflicts that I had before to being their dad. The onus is on us to make sure that what they are seeing is a gospel example. And I think sometimes, and this is, I think, certainly true of before, that we always thought we needed to do something more or do something, an event, in order to say, yes, I'm doing that thing. And what my wife and I have been really reminded of in our own family over the last while is that it's really just about capitalizing on what already is there. Praying with our kids through the things that are happening in daily life that we used to hope they would do in school on their own. So when they have a fight with their siblings, which is common, a disagreement, a spat, I was using this, they were using this, why do we have to da-da-da-da? So I've had some really cool conversations with my 8-year-old about what it means to do things that mean nothing for you. Because, and she's learning this, she has 3 younger siblings, and a lot of her day is spent, and I'm so proud of her for how she's grown in this way, because at the start, I thought she was gonna die, but she's really leaned into this ability to say, this isn't for me, and nothing about this is about for me, but I'm gonna do this to bless my siblings.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, your oldest is 8?
Yes.
So there's 3 younger than 8.
Twin 3-year-olds. Yeah.
God bless you. God bless you. A lot of people with kids right now, they have a franticness in their house. And we're talking about faith at home. I know there's a lot of people who feel maybe guilty that they're not,
sure.
They're doing more stuff. So can you maybe share like a word of grace for them? But at the same time, also a word of challenge too.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned those two things, because that's life of the believer, right? Is not excusing ourselves from the high standard that is put before us, but also not expecting ourselves to be Jesus, because that's him, not us. And so it's very important that we live in that tension. And I think, again, what it requires of us is some real honest evaluation of what was, what is, and what will be going forward. There will be things that we ask ourselves as a family going out of this. I mean, we are loving that our Saturdays right now, which you can relate to, Matthew, is one of our few family days when neither parent is working, because Sunday is a work day, and my day off is a day when my kids are still at school, or now they're not. And so Saturday is a day when mom and dad don't have to do anything. Saturday is a day when we don't have gymnastics anymore. Mm-hmm. Saturday is a day when we don't have our every other week, dinner with grandma and grandpa. It's just family time. Yeah. And so we're having to ask ourselves, okay, when this is over, how important is gymnastics? Is it more important than the time that we've been given as a family to just enjoy a day together? Like, we've really made it a Sabbath time. Well, similarly, I'm thinking of how you've created some fantastic resources for families, for individuals, in terms of their own personal faith development. How do you, as somebody who's very in touch with this, perceive what is a new, better normal for personal discipleship going forward?
So as I answer that question, you'll notice that all of a sudden it looks a bit different, the video. Well, that's because in my conversation with Alex, Zoom started to go a bit crazy. And so I've subbed in this video, and then we'll return to Alex in a moment. But in terms of answering that question, three things come to mind. First is a reevaluation of priorities. The second is a greater openness to God and dependence on God. And third is a return to the spiritual basics as our lives become rearranged. So let me explain. So first, a reevaluation of priorities. So I'm just of the belief, and I've said this before, that a crisis creates clarity around what's important. And so when something happens like this, what's important? Well, our relationship with God. Also, the people we care about, we want to make sure that they are well, right? And there's other things on the list too, but those things are up there. And so a lot of people are reevaluating, hey, what's important to me? What priorities should I live by? And that's a good thing that we want to preserve. Second, a greater openness to God and dependence on God. I was watching an interview with author Tim Keller, former preacher at Redeemer Church in New York City, and he said this. He said, "When you are made to feel less than self-sufficient, there is an openness to God." Right? So all of a sudden we realize, wait a second, we things are tough here, and we can't figure this out on our own, and we're going through this time of hardship. And so there's this greater openness to God, because we realize that we can't do it all ourselves, that we need others and we need God. And in that sense, there's also a greater dependence upon God, dependence on His goodness, His sovereignty, His care to see us through the challenging chapters of our lives. And so the risk is that when we go back to a new normal, whatever that might be, we'll go back to thinking, oh, well, I'm doing pretty well on my own, thanks. But really, we're just as dependent upon God at all times, even when things are going better in our lives. Third, a return to the spiritual basics as our lives become rearranged. So another thing that people have said to me is that I feel like my life is dislocated, and it's very fragmented right now. And I can certainly relate to that. And so there's an opportunity to rearrange the pieces of our lives around the spiritual basics. And so, and of course, I'm a big believer in developing habits that are good. So at first you make your habits, and then your habits make you. So we establish habits, and then they have this boomerang transformative effect on our lives. And so let me just name some of them. And these are pieces that we can bring back to the center of our lives. And then when things continue from here, they can be rearranged around these pillars. So Bible reading, of course, daily, prayer, worship. As we know, a lot of people have said, sometimes I don't know what day it is, but I know when Sunday is, because it's worship day. Fellowship. Is another important one, right? And Christine talked about the importance of community. Another one is acts of service. So looking for those opportunities to serve others, quite often in a sacrificial way. That's a part of our faith. But I want to highlight here this intentional simplicity. intentional simplicity. So this is maybe something that people haven't really thought of before, and a lot of people maybe don't think their lives are very simple right now, but hear me out. So it comes from Matthew 6, many passages, but Matthew 6 comes to mind. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he says this, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Right? So where the things that you treasure. And so this is a time when our lives are getting rearranged and we can't go out and shop and do things, can't go out and do all the activities that we were maybe doing before. And what's interesting about this passage from Matthew 6 is the stuff that we store up for ourselves, these treasures on earth, number one, don't last. Two, can often be a source of stress. So is this for us a time of decluttering, where we can actually kind of lean into some intentional simplicity and say to ourselves, you know what, there's some stuff in my life that was there before that really shouldn't have been there. And when I get into this new normal, however that's going to look, I'm going to reconstruct my life around these spiritual basics, and not kind of reclutter my life with some of the stuff that was distracting me from my relationship with God and that was not helping me prioritize some of the things that mattered most. So I think those three things, Alex: a reevaluation of priorities, greater openness to God and dependence on God, and three, a return to the spiritual basics as our lives become rearranged. So I think today we're going to close it out there. And I just want to thank, again, Christine O'Reilly for joining us, for Alex Douglas. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your clear and contagious passion for the gospel, which is so great. It's always great to hang out with you and to see you, even on Zoom.
That's right.
And our final thought is going to be this. So I started this off by saying that Darryl Dash had written this article called Better Than Before, which kind of springboarded this thing. In that he quotes a prayer that was handed to a pastor once, and this is what it says. It says, "Pray that God uses these days as a merciful reset of our lives." And that's my prayer for us too.
Amen.
Even though it's difficult, even though it's ups and downs and mountains and valleys and perhaps some more valleys, let's pray that God uses these days as a merciful reset of our lives.
Amen.